The numerous reports of UFO sightings have been a point of great controversy. The idea of extraterrestrial visitors traveling from distant planets is instantly dismissed by many. However, the attempted cover-ups of government investigations and the ongoing appearances of these strange craft may lead one to believe that these occurrences are not altogether without foundation. On a normal summer day in May of 1967, reports of a UFO in the community of Falcon Lake, Manitoba began to surface. However, nothing was officially documented. A local handyman was tending to his daily tasks when he was interrupted by a curious sound. He caught a glimpse of a strange craft hovering overhead. And then, in a flash, it disappeared into the sky.
Unidentified flying objects, or UFOs, have been a matter of debate for decades. Flying saucers, Area 51, close encounters, these are all part of this debate's great mystery. Discussions continue to this day. Do they exist or not? Apparently they do in Falcon Lake, Manitoba.
Falcon Lake's White Shell Provincial Park is the site of one of the most perplexing cases of alien existence. On that fateful summer day nearly 40 years ago, several locals claimed to have seen unusual lights and shapes in the sky. But there was one man who actually witnessed a UFO landing. And for him, this mysterious encounter left him scarred for life.
My name is Chris Rutkowski. I've been studying reports of UFOs and other phenomena for 25 years or so. And one of the most fascinating cases I've ever had a chance to investigate and delve into was the report out of Falcon Lake in 1967 when Mr. Stefan Mihalik saw a Hollywood-style flying saucer land fairly close to him in an area just north of the town. On the May long weekend in 1967, Mr. Mihalik was doing some amateur prospecting. He had actually staked a few claims and knew that there were some good quartz veins in the area.
Stefan Mihalik was a welder by trade, but as an amateur geologist on the side, he would often drive from Winnipeg to Falcon Lake on his days off. His frequent visits to White Shell Provincial Park always proved to be successful, usually resulting in his retrieving a fine assortment of mineral specimens. Finding a rich quartz vein, he kept mining this area late into the evening. Finally finished for the day, Stefan decided to take a quick break before his long trip back home. Suddenly, he heard an odd sound in the distance. He listened intently, trying to identify the strange noise. His curiosity was sparked. Slowly, he walked over to investigate. As he crept through the brush, he was astonished to see an alien spacecraft. He was even more incredulous when he peered into the interior of the craft, seeing two figures standing in the doorway. Suddenly, the door slammed shut. The spaceship took off into the night sky. Its hasty departure not only surprised Stephen Mahalik, but severely burning him with its exhaust as well.
He made it back to Winnipeg. He was treated at a hospital. He was feeling very dizzy, very disoriented. He had first and second degree burns on his chest, had an unusual pattern of burn marks on his abdomen. The psychiatrist who examined him came to the conclusion that Mr. Mahalik was a very reputable man who didn't make up stories as a matter of course, and in their mind, Mr. Mahalik was telling the truth. In fact, the police began an intense investigation. The RCMP, the Royal Canadian Air Force, the United States Air Force, a number of other government agencies, they all investigated the case in great detail. What's curious is that the United States Air Force itself listed the case of Mr. Mahalik as unexplained in its final report on UFOs, which was issued in the late 1960s.
This strange account of Stephen Mahalik's experience is almost unbelievable, except for some theories regarding the physical evidence left on his body. At first, doctors claimed that the burns were the result of a barbecuing accident. However, further diagnosis ruled out that theory, and they were unable to determine the cause of the injury. Stephen has been quite diligent about protecting his anonymity, fearing exposure would subject him to ridicule. He has returned to his normal life, with only a few minor recurring health problems. Perhaps we may never know the reasons for this alien visit, but despite Stephen's injuries, many come to Falcon Lake hoping for just such an encounter. In Fort Qu'Appelle, Saskatchewan, stands the Echo Valley Conference Center, where haunting memories of the past still echo throughout the building. One staff member received a harsh reminder of the center's tragic history when she entered the kitchen, which had once been a morgue. Out of nowhere, a butcher's knife took on a life of its own, slowly rising from the counter by itself. Then, as if released by an unseen hand, it fell back down. Momentarily relieved, she turned to find herself face to face with a terrifying and silent man in blue coveralls. Ignoring her presence, the figure vanished, leaving the woman shaken and once again alone.
The Echo Valley Conference Center in Fort Qu'Appelle, Saskatchewan is a beautiful place, but its past was anything but cheerful. As sometimes happens, a building's past may still linger on inside it, occasionally giving terrifying glimpses of what once was.
Echo Valley is now a popular location for corporate retreats and private functions. However, staff and guests alike have encountered at least 3 different entities from the building's past who remain connected to the center.
The conference center used to be called the Fort Sanatorium. It opened in 1917 for TB patients. A lot of the TB patients came in, they were pretty much so far gone that they didn't have much of a prayer. Thousands of people didn't make it out of here. I think just about anywhere where a lot of people have died, and in a place that's been around for a long time, there's got to be some sort of spirits or some kind of a residue left behind, yes.
Many who suffered with the horrible disease of tuberculosis in the first half of the 20th century were abandoned and left to die alone in sanatoriums such as this. Perhaps it is these lonely souls who, for reasons unknown, seem unable to leave this building, the last place on earth to offer them comfort. One of the spirits seen at the conference center has a particularly tragic story. A staff member heard a crying child and went to investigate. She saw a woman carrying an infant. The mysterious woman walked off in silence, and then the sound of the crying came from behind her. The child's cries echoed down the hallways, and she followed, but found nothing. Many think this mother, seen carrying her infant, is the spirit of a patient from the tuberculosis center, eternally searching for someone to save her dying child. Another mysterious entity has been witnessed on many occasions. During the building's renovation, a staff member heard a woman singing echoing through the empty building. She followed the sound and came upon a woman standing at a sink in the bathroom. She was quietly humming to herself and repeatedly washing her hands. The figure stared at her, then simply disappeared. Even more disconcerting was that the sink, which had been full of water moments before, was now bone dry. It is presumed that this tragic spirit is yet another of the victims of this nightmarish disease.
We're standing in front of Wood Mountain Lodge. Wood Mountain Lodge is the scene of one of our entities here that's seen on a regular basis. We call her Nurse Jane.
Not all entities reported at the Echo Valley Conference Center are victims of tuberculosis. Some spirits may be apparitions of those dedicated workers who risked their own lives in an attempt to heal these sick people. Guests and staff have seen a woman dressed in a 1940s era nurse's uniform. Though her appearance can be frightening, after her departure, people have reported feelings of empathy and compassion.
One of our other entities here we call the Blue Man. The Blue Man is seen in almost every building on the complex.
The entity nicknamed the Blue Man, who was given his name because he is always seen in blue workers' coveralls, is a menacing specter, one who has been stalking this conference center for years. His imposing footsteps are heard echoing throughout the buildings at night. This intimidating figure may be the only dangerous ghost at Echo Valley. One guest claimed to have been physically attacked by the violent phantom. He struggled with this invisible entity until suddenly he found himself released. Many theorize the Blue Man is the spirit of a former hospital employee. The motivations for his violent behavior remain a mystery to this day. Many guests have come and gone, but the Blue Man, the elusive mother, and the mysterious nurse remain. It seems each of these ghosts has a story that they wish to share. As long as the building stays standing, the spirits of the Echo Valley Conference Center will be there, awaiting new arrivals. In St. Catharines, Ontario, paranormal researchers and outdoor enthusiasts alike have discovered a previously unexplored haunted location. This 700-foot passage is known as the Blue Ghost Tunnel. Though the tunnel is off the beaten path, those who venture there are rarely disappointed. a hiker who had heard stories about the mysterious tunnel decided to investigate for herself. As she made her way through the dark interior, she heard strange moaning sounds. She told herself it was the wind. Then she saw a misty blue apparition moving in front of her. The shape disappeared, and at that same moment, inexplicably, her flashlight died. She knew that she had just encountered the spirit of the Blue Ghost Tunnel.
Serious paranormal investigators are willing to travel into the darkest depths and over the most challenging terrain to solve many of life's unexplained mysteries. This passion led one group on a quest into the terrifying interior of the legendary Blue Ghost Tunnel in St. Catharines, Ontario, where a 700-foot passageway brought them face to face with the unknown.
When you go into the tunnel, you're in a different world, and it's kind of, you get eerie feelings of being watched, maybe looked over. People have seen strange apparitions in the tunnel, sounds of footsteps, whispering, which I've personally heard inside the tunnel, photographs that are strange and sometimes unexplainable. In 1903, there was a fatal rail collision at the tunnel at the west end. Two trains collided head-on and both engineers were killed. The train wreck may have very well something to do with the hauntings here.
Another hiker came upon the tunnel by chance. He saw a blue spectral figure whirling at the entrance. It moved inside and vanished. Curious, he followed. Many paranormal investigators feel the blue apparition is not the spirit of one particular individual, but rather the manifestation of the many lost souls trapped in the tunnel, trying to remind travelers about the tragic accident that took their lives over 100 years earlier. Suddenly, a strange light appeared, coming directly at the hiker. He swore that for a brief moment he saw a ghostly train pass through the dark tunnel. He quickly turned to leave, wishing he had heeded the warning of the mysterious blue apparition. A paranormal research group volunteered to perform an investigation of the Blue Ghost Tunnel. They brought 2 experienced psychic mediums and an array of night vision cameras and electronic detection equipment. The mediums sensed the spirits of the 2 engineers who had died, although they were not told about the train wreck prior to entering.
Do you get anything about an accident?
I do get the sensation of those 2 men. One is bleeding on his face, the other one has blood on his outfit, his clothes.
I just had my 3rd flashlight. The bulb just burnt out. I've been having problems with my infrared thermostat tonight for some reason. I've had 2 camera batteries go dead on me, and that doesn't usually happen. Supposedly spirits drain power from batteries, although at this point in time I've never experienced that.
This is my first night using this little talisman. When I come in here with it, though, it gives a very negative reaction. It's spinning counterclockwise.
The pendulum works similar to what Kate was using with her talisman. It picks up the energy of the spirit. It's definitely not a happy energy. I asked if the spirits here were happy, and it's saying no, they're not happy. There's a sadness definitely in the air.
I was just standing there by myself because a lot of the time it's easier to get a reading on the EMF meter. and your light was turned off, and then we started hearing the screaming. I'm guessing there were kids out there playing, but then something else started, a long, high-pitched cry. And turning around here, you said you want to go in further into the tunnel, and I'm just getting a great big no. Stuff is going to start happening as soon as we go down there. They're not happy that we're here this late.
There's a banging that we've been hearing down at the end of the tunnel. And it had stopped for a while until we started talking about approaching this area again. As we got closer, it started to bang again, almost as if it was telling us, yes, to come down this way.
There's something else down here. It is not human. There's some kind of energy that comes over here at night. Like I said, this is its spot. Comes rushing through the tunnel. I see this big black thing, ugly looking face just flying through the tunnel, screaming, running right at us.
Coming into this place, I don't think any of us expected it to be like this. So much stuff has been happening tonight, and a lot of our equipment's going wonky. Kate and Michelle are feeling a lot of weird things in here. I personally am not psychic, and I'm feeling uncomfortable in here. It's just really odd.
Though the group did not make physical contact with the spirits, the medium's psychic impressions and the unusual photographs taken that night offer compelling evidence of paranormal activity in the Blue Ghost Tunnel. Whether the entities are the ghosts of those victims killed in the railway disaster or some metaphysical energy left by this tragic crash is unknown. Perhaps future investigations will shed some light on this unexplained mystery. The Sepperly House, an art gallery in Burnaby, British Columbia, is home to more than just wonderful works of art. A security guard working the graveyard shift thought he saw a woman walk past him. In line with his duties, he left to investigate. Floor by floor, he checked each room carefully, but found something he never quite expected. He encountered the spirit of Mrs. Grace Sepperly. Many other unusual encounters have taken place within the walls of the Sepperly House.
The Sepperly House in Burnaby, British Columbia, is now an art gallery, but it once belonged to the extremely dominant Grace Sepperly. Unfortunately, it seems that Mrs. Sepperly cannot rest in peace. It may be that a broken promise keeps Mrs. Sepperly wandering the halls of her one-time home.
A young employee was working in the gallery. She heard footsteps. Thinking that perhaps it was a patron, she walked over to greet them. When she reached the stairway, there was no one in sight, yet the sound of footsteps were still emanating from above. Curious, the young employee followed the sound up the stairs. When she reached the top, again, no one was there, but now the footsteps had stopped. She continued her search, looking in the bathroom. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her. She reached for the knob, but couldn't open it. Something or someone was preventing it from opening. And then, just as she felt a presence behind her, the spirit of Mrs. Sepperly appeared. She struggled with the door. Finally managing to open it, the young employee ran in fear. It seems the spirit of Mrs. Sepperly still roams these halls, even today.
We're standing outside the Sepperly mansion. It was constructed by Henry and Grace Sepperly. We understand it was Grace's money that actually was used to build the property here. Henry Sepperly had many different careers from our records. He was a lawyer by some accounts, a real estate agent by others. Grace Sepperly, her family was well-to-do and well-connected. Mrs. Sepperly died in 1917, and she had a clause in her will that Henry could live in the house for as long as he wanted. When he was to sell the house, the proceeds were to be used for construction of a park in a children's play area in Stanley Park, and it's called Sepperly Playground.
After the passing of Grace Sepperly, Mr. Sepperly did, in fact, sell her beloved mansion. However, rumor has it that after the sale, Grace's wishes for charity went unfulfilled by her husband, who donated only a small portion of the proceeds to the park. Many claim that Grace Sepperly came back to haunt her husband after death. She was not happy that this provision in her will was taken so lightly. A dying wish ignored may surely be the reason for her continued appearances. A patron came to the Sepperly House Gallery to see a local exhibit. However, while admiring the carefully placed photos on the wall, he felt a presence. The lights around him began to flicker, and when he turned, he saw the ghost of Mrs. Sepperly. In life, Grace Sepperly was a kind and generous woman who wanted to bequeath a portion of her prosperity to her community. One can only wonder if her husband had fulfilled her dying wish, would her restless spirit still roam the halls of her past home, the mansion which should have been the means to realize her dreams. There is a passageway in Kingston, Ontario, used by pedestrians as a shortcut through the city's downtown core. But sometimes this alley can lead one far beyond the next street and into places unknown. As a man walked through the alleyway, he felt someone or something brush past him. woman appeared from out of nowhere. The two looked at each other as they drew closer together. This startling apparition began to speak to him, but the man could not understand what she was saying. He stood there in shock, and then, as quickly as she had appeared, she vanished. When he came to his senses and realized what had just happened, his shock quickly turned to fear, and he ran away.
Kingston, Ontario is one of Canada's oldest cities, and with its vibrant history comes equally interesting legends. In an old carriageway now converted to a pedestrian walkway, there is a myth of a woman named Teresa Ignace Beam. Tragedy struck Teresa in this carriageway, and it seems the spirit of this young lady lives on there.
A spirit of a woman is often seen in this alley. It seems that she is not afraid of the living. In fact, she often communicates with them in a plea for help from the beyond.
People have been reporting hauntings in this area ever since the late 1900s. Now, these encounters have to do with one ghost in particular named Teresa Ignace Beam. There was a photographer who had a studio in this area, and he found out some pretty interesting things one evening. So one night he convinced his assistant to stay late, and they took out a Ouija board to try to contact whoever was causing these problems. Well, they were surprisingly successful. They got in touch with a woman who said her name was Teresa Ignace Beam. She claimed to be murdered in 1868 by a man named John Napier. She said that she was pregnant when she was murdered, and she claimed to be buried in their basement.
On that fateful night, Teresa was to meet her lover John to share some wonderful news. When he arrived in the alley for their secret rendezvous, she could not wait to tell him she was pregnant. John did not take the news well, thinking only of his social standing. He was a successful entrepreneur who was already married with children. It would be disastrous for his philandering and incestuous affair to be exposed in the community, for not only was Teresa his secret lover, she was also John Napier's aunt. As Teresa told her nephew of her passion for him and how she believed this child to be a blessing, his temper flared. In a fit of rage, he gripped her neck and slowly squeezed the life from her. As Teresa's dead body lay on the ground, John looked on, feeling little remorse. He simply turned his back and left. Legend has it that men employed by John later dismembered her body and buried the remains in several parts of the alley. Now Teresa's spirit roams the place of her death, reaching out for help from anyone who comes her way.
We call her Kingston's most active ghost for a reason, with sightings up to even a few days ago. Now, people walking through this alleyway have had a number of encounters with Teresa. They've had her approach them and say, "Can you please help me find my bones? They're in the walls. Please help me find my bones."
When a young lady entered the alley, she heard what sounded like several people whispering coming from behind her. But when she looked, no one was there. Suddenly, an intense and horrible feeling came over her. She couldn't breathe. It was as if she were being choked. When the feeling dissipated, a ghostly female figure stood in front of her and began to speak. The apparition began to tell the frightened woman the story of her murder, asking her for help to find her scattered bones. Seconds later, the apparition vanished, leaving the young woman shocked, confused, and very frightened. Some say that Teresa returns to the spot of her murder as a result of never having been given a proper Roman Catholic burial, while others believe that she returns to this alley, mourning the loss of her unborn child. This one-time carriageway in Kingston was the site of the terrible murder of Teresa Ignace Beam. Her only crime was carrying a child that she conceived in the confines of love. Today, pedestrians have replaced the carriages. However, Teresa has returned to haunt this alley, and she is seen so frequently that her spirit is claimed to be Kingston's most active. At this New Brunswick City archive, which was once a prison, history seems to live on, uninterrupted by death. A young student came to the archive to conduct research in preparation for a paper he was writing. Sifting through the records, he felt as if he was being watched. In fact, he was. The young man had an encounter with a resident spirit who roams the Charlotte County Jail.
In St. Andrews by the Sea, New Brunswick, the city's archives are housed in a wonderful gray granite building, once the Charlotte County Jail. At times, both the guilty and innocent alike were jailed there. It is this backdrop which provides an eerie setting for many unexplained events.
In the early 1800s, Thomas Dowd was employed as a farmhand by Mr. Thomas Ward and his young wife Eliza. Dowd was responsible for tending to the homestead, and some say that he took his job too literally and was believed to be having an affair with Eliza. Mr. Ward was brutally murdered. It wasn't until weeks later that his body was found, and next to it, Thomas Dowd's axe. Dowd was charged and convicted of the horrific killing. While in prison, he received letters from Eliza, who had also been arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder. But Dowd would be the one to die for the crime. On the day of his execution, Thomas Dowd proclaimed his innocence, swearing he had not committed the murder. But nevertheless, he was hung for the violent crime against Mr. Ward. To this day, many suspect the apparition who appears in these cells is in fact the ghost of Thomas Dowd.
The cell that Mr. Dowd stayed in, which is right beside me here, has had unusual things happening in it. It actually, in September, which is the anniversary of Mr. Ward's death, there's a blue light that comes into the cell, and people believe that it to be writing, "I'm innocent, I'm innocent." The actual hanging, as I said, for him took place in 1879. The last known spotting that we know of for the actual writing on the wall is in the early 80s.
An employee of the archives heard a noise that sounded like footsteps coming from the cell block. She felt very uncomfortable, as if she was not alone. When the woman entered the area that once was Thomas Dowd's cell, she noticed a blue light that seemed to be writing letters on the wall. As she watched, the letters spelled out the words, "I'm innocent." Over the years, numerous people have witnessed this peculiar blue light, and some sightings date back to the prison days before the building was converted to the city archives in 1982.
Yes, I did see the light, and I had several or different prisoners before that saw the light in that cell, and that's supposed to be Tommy Dowd, a young fellow from La Prove. He's supposed to have murdered this man, but according to all rumors, he didn't do it.
Rumors continue to circulate, proclaiming Eliza to be the true murderer. Often, it seems as though spirits become inextricably bound to the place of their death. Could this mean they have unfinished business? Thomas Dowd's proclamations of innocence reverberate through this place even today, convincing many that a person's need for justice and closure doesn't necessarily die when they do. In the 1940s, Newfoundland's Bell Island mines were the lifeblood of the community, employing thousands of local men. The miners' wives learned to recognize their husbands at a glance by their body language. How they walked or carried their lunchbox was enough to distinguish one man from another, even at a distance. One woman caught a glimpse of a miner standing just ahead of her. She recognized his stance and his familiar clothing. She was positive it was her husband, despite the fact that the man she loved had died several months earlier. She remembered walking with him to the mines each day, how she would watch him begin the long journey down into the tunnels without her. Then she recalled hearing the horrible news. There had been an accident and her husband was dead. But now, here he was, standing right in front of her. She was sure of it. She walked towards him, knowing it was impossible, but wanting so desperately to believe. Slowly, he turned, and she saw that it was her husband. But it was not the face she had loved. It was the face of death. perhaps the grave is not deep enough to hold the many lost souls of the Bell Island mines.
Mining is a dangerous occupation, one which requires a very special brand of courage and determination. On Bell Island in Newfoundland, there were plenty of men ready to take on that challenge, and in many cases, it cost them their lives. Very few places have as many ghost stories surrounding them as the Bell Island iron ore mines.
A miner had finished his shift. As he headed towards the lockers, he was joined by a pleasant young fellow who mentioned several times that this was his first day on the job. As they continued along, the young man simply vanished. The confused miner approached a co-worker and told him what had just happened. His friend told him the story of a young miner. On his first day of work, he was put on scraping beat and was responsible for removing any loose rock from the recently dug tunnels. He was struck by some falling stones. Though bruised, he believed the injury to be minor, so he continued with his work, eager to make a good impression. Later, he became dizzy and collapsed. Before anyone could help him, he died of a massive concussion. Since that day, miners had been approached by the spirit of this young man, always cheerful, but disappearing the moment they reached the entrance to the tunnel where the fatal accident occurred.
Men who come up at the mines afterwards who were hired on over the years, they would find themselves walking and talking to a young man who was 18 years of age. And that happened to so many men on so many different occasions that number 2 mines actually shut down. Years ago, the men, when they started to use dynamite, of course blasting was a dangerous job. And the company had decided to use a new form of dynamite, which was a lot more powerful, but they neglected to tell the blasters.
The explosives crew was considered the elite of the workers. They were methodical men who took no unnecessary risks. That fateful day, the unwitting miners followed the same tried and true procedures they always had. The ensuing blast had twice the expected power. By some miracle, only one of the men was killed. After a long recuperation, the survivor went back to work in the mines and even considered returning to explosives work. He was shocked to see the figure of his dead blasting partner. His face still bore the scars caused by the explosion. The figure reached out for him and vanished. The survivor never touched a stick of dynamite again.
An awful lot of men who worked in the mines saw this young man, right, and saw different young men who were killed in the mines.
Other miners began seeing this scarred and bleeding man standing near the blast area. Only to have him disappear into the rocks. Even his own widow reported glimpsing her mutilated husband's spirit.
There were an awful lot of men killed in the mines. There's probably somewhere close to 100 men that were killed. And one of the most famous stories that surround the mines are number 2 mines, where the men actually start to come up at the mines one night, and all the men that came up and left the mine were dead. And a lot of people saw it.
Why this parade of spirits chose to appear in the 1940s is unknown. Perhaps sensing the mine's impending closure, they chose to move on. Unfortunately, most of the witnesses to this event have themselves died, but their children still remember these and many other legends about the now closed mines. The stories have been passed down from generation to generation as fact rather than fiction. Recently, the mines have been reopened for tours, allowing visitors to experience firsthand how these brave men lived and died in the darkness 1,000 feet beneath Bell Island. Hidden away in the wetlands of Manitoba, 50 kilometers north of Portage-la Prairie, stands a remote research station. Some say a shrouded figure roams the grounds around the building, which used to be the Mallard Lodge.
The Mallard Lodge is located in the Delta Marsh, 50 kilometers north of Portage-la Prairie. Originally a hunting lodge, it is now home to the Delta Marsh Research Station, part of the University of Manitoba. However, it seems there is one scientific anomaly at the lodge which science can't explain.
The Delta Marsh wetlands are internationally renowned, and not just for the abundant wildlife.
Hi, my name is Ginger Arnold, and I've been working here at the Delta Marsh University of Manitoba Field Station for 3 years. And over the years, I've heard many ghost stories from people who have experienced them. Some people believe that there are ghosts here, and a lot of people have claimed to see ghosts.
In 1932, Murray was a caretaker and had been employed for many years by Donald Bain, the former owner of the lodge. Though the grounds were well kept, he always allowed the natural rugged beauty of the area to show through. Murray worked hard and took great pride in his tasks. Often, on his day off, he would go out onto the wetlands for the finest duck hunting in all of Canada, a pastime he truly loved. Preparations for one particular outing would end in tragedy. While cleaning his rifle, it accidentally discharged, killing Murray instantly. Evidently, his loyalty to the lodge remained strong. After the death of Mr. Bain in 1962, the lodge became the property of the province of Manitoba. In 1966, the University of Manitoba acquired the lodge and the surrounding lands, transforming it into the Delta Marsh Research Station, open to senior researchers and students alike.
I guess the most prominent story would be a friend of mine, Adrian Robertson, when he, I guess, encountered something here. And there was a figure in the window. So the first thing Adrian did was, once he got in, and it's such an old building, he just came in and stopped and listened. And then went into room 3 and found nothing. There was nobody under the beds, in the closet, or anything.
Many encounters with Murray's ghost occur in room number 3, which is believed to have been his quarters for the many years he lived at the lodge. After a long drive through the night, a researcher arrived at the lodge, dreary and tired. He was given room number 3. Anxious for sleep, he didn't even change his clothes. He just fell onto the bed and started to drift off. Unfortunately, his rest was quickly interrupted. Too frightened to return to his room, the researcher tried desperately to keep himself awake. But soon his exhaustion overpowered his fear, and he attempted once again to get some sleep. However, his efforts were in vain. Although Murray loved his former place of employment, he seems upset with the many visitors frequenting the lodge. Perhaps he feels they are disrupting his peaceful home, especially when they are staying in room number 3. Sightings of Murray are common at the old Mallard Lodge. The feeling of being watched has become normal. Reported visions of a faint hooded figure wandering around are not unusual. Though the building is now a scientific research station, there seems to be no scientific explanation to lights turning on and off on their own, or this mysterious hooded figure appearing and disappearing at will. This sometimes frightening spirit may very well be the old caretaker Murray, who, for reasons unknown, seems unable to give up his duties at the much-loved lodge he still considers his home.